The World News Today is being brought to you by One Solar Solution. Check out how you can get those solar panels installed at your home or residence by going to onesolarsolution.com. Bringing you the world news coming up next. This is Radio Caravan, the world news, read by Shabnam Modgil. As of this morning, Sally is still a hurricane with winds of 85 miles per hour, which is slightly lower than overnight. The seventh hurricane so far this season, while the normal is 6. It will be the third hurricane making landfall along the Gulf Coast this season. Sally will also be the fourth hurricane to make landfall in the United States this season. The last time we had more than 4 hurricanes to make landfall in the United States was in 2005, when there were 5, including Hurricane Katrina. Relief from putrid, dangerous air spewing from massive wildfires across the west won't come until later in the week or beyond. And the hazy and gunk-filled skies might stick around for even longer. People in Oregon, Washington, and parts of California are struggling under acrid yellowish-green smog, the worst, most unhealthy air on the planet, according to some measurements. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres will use his annual address to world leaders next week to push for a global ceasefire until the end of this year so countries can go ahead and fight for the coronavirus pandemic. But he said opportunities will be lost because presidents and prime ministers are not physically in New York. Forgotten diseases have hit the poorest billion the hardest during the COVID-19 pandemic. And Novavax Inc. is doubling its COVID-19 vaccine manufacturing capacity to 2 billion doses under an agreement with the Serum Institute of India. A vaccine is critical to end the coronavirus disease pandemic, and India's pharmaceutical industry will play a major role because of its ability to manufacture high-quality vaccines at affordable prices, said Bill Gates, the Microsoft co-founder and co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. In early May, most Americans said they would get vaccinated when a vaccine becomes available. Now, 4 months later, less than a third of Americans say they plan to get vaccinated. Many patients have overcome initial fears of COVID-19 infections and resumed doctor visits. This mainly in hard-hit regions like Texas, Florida, and California as they return to more or less normal capacity. Most Americans are skeptical of President Trump's performance on the coronavirus pandemic, disapproving of his response, disbelieving of his rhetoric on the virus, and critical of what they view as his lagging approach to contain it. President Trump is running as the law and order candidate, but that hasn't stopped him in his campaign from openly defying state emergency orders and flouting his own administration's coronavirus guidelines as he holds ever-growing rallies in battleground states. In the past 2 weeks, he has notched a string of diplomatic wins he's highlighting with voters in the run-up to the election, but his report card on the most serious threats to U.S. national security shows an incomplete. Democrat Joe Biden today will make his first campaign visit of the year to Florida, where opinion polls show a tight race against President Trump amid signs of lagging support for Biden among the battleground states' crucial Hispanic voters. Democratic presidential candidate has pledged to rejoin the historic Paris Agreement on climate change if elected to power in the November presidential election and set new standards towards reducing carbon emissions. Kamala Harris's arrival on the Democratic presidential ticket has helped prompt a historic outpouring of contributions, bringing in women donors, Californians and others who had avoided donating to the Biden campaign until they saw his running mate pick. Scrutiny of Postmaster General Louis DeJoy intensified amid new reports alleging improper business dealings and persistent charges that the longtime Republican donor is subverting postal operations in order to make mail-in voting difficult in November's presidential election. And a U.S. appeals court has sided with President Trump over his administration's decision to end humanitarian protections for hundreds of thousands of immigrants, many of whom have lived in the United States for decades. The U.S. has today issued a sweeping new advisory warning against travel to mainland China and Hong Kong, citing the risk of arbitrary detention and arbitrary enforcement of local laws. The advisory is likely to heighten tensions between the sides that have spiked since Beijing's imposition on Hong Kong of a strict new national security law in June that has already been met with a series of U.S. punitive actions. This week also, the U.S. State Department downgraded its travel warning for Mexico. The news comes less than 2 weeks before the current border closure agreement between the U.S. and its southern neighbor is set to expire. The United Arab Emirates and Bahrain today will become the latest Arab states to break a long-standing taboo when they sign agreements towards normalizing relations with Israel. in a strategic realignment of Middle Eastern countries against Iran. President Trump will host the White House ceremony at noon today, capping a dramatic month when first the UAE and then Bahrain agreed to reverse decades of ill will without a resolution of Israel's decades-old dispute with the Palestinians. President Trump is set to preside over this signing of historic diplomatic deals between Israel and the two Gulf Arab nations that could herald a dramatic shift in Middle East power dynamics and give him a boost ahead of his elections. Iran warning the U.S. against making a strategic mistake after President Trump threatened Tehran over reports it planned to avenge the killing of top General Qasem Soleimani. President Trump vowed that any attack by Iran would be met with a response 1,000 times greater in magnitude. The U.S. envoy for peace in Afghanistan has told BBC he was not happy about a controversial deal there to release 5,000 Taliban prisoners in order to secure historic peace. And a fire has broken out this morning in a downtown Beirut building near the city's port where an explosion last month killed nearly 200, wounded thousands and left the city's residents traumatized. The UN Migration Agency has said that a boat carrying migrants bound for Europe has capsized in the Mediterranean Sea of Libya, leaving at least 2,000 people drowned or missing and presumed dead. Greece's migration minister has said that the government will use force if necessary to move homeless migrants to a new tent city after fires at an overcrowded refugee camp left thousands of people without shelter on the island of Lesbos. Russian President Putin has bestowed a $1.5 billion loan on Belarus today after its embattled leader flew to the Black Sea resort of Sochi to ask his patron for additional support. And Russian opposition politician Alexei Navalny has shared a photograph from a Berlin hospital sitting up in bed and surrounded by his family, and said he could now breathe independently following his suspected poisoning last month. Chancellor Angela Merkel celebrated the renaissance of Jewish life in Germany but denounced the disgrace of increasingly open anti-Semitism and racism as she marked the 70th anniversary today of the country's main Jewish group, the Central Council of Jews, founded in 1950 to represent Jews who had survived the Nazi Holocaust. And British Prime Minister Boris Johnson lashed out at the European Union today as he won initial approval for a plan to breach the Brexit treaty, saying the move was needed because the bloc had refused to take a revolver off the table in trade talks. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the World News on Radio Caravan. More than 70 people have been arrested in Melbourne in Australia for flouting the state's stay-at-home orders to attend an anti-lockdown protest. And the Vatican has asked Taiwan not to worry about the extension of a deal between the Vatican and China on the appointment of bishops, as it was a religious matter, not a diplomatic one. China warned the United States of potential serious damage to their relations if it does not withdraw from an upcoming economic meeting with Taiwan that is expected to be attended by a senior American official. China's defense ministry blasted the U.S. report on the country's military ambitions, saying it is the U.S. and not China that poses the biggest threat to international order and world peace. And a Chinese academic has countered U.S.-backed allegations that China is using forced sterilization against Muslims in Xinjiang, saying the claims were based on fabricated facts and falsified data. Defense Minister Rajnath Singh addressed Parliament today on India's ongoing border war with China and said that Beijing does not recognize the current boundary. He said and warned that any serious situation along the line of actual control in eastern Ladakh is bound to impact the bilateral relations between India and China. India's armed forces have foiled the transgression attempts by China in Ladakh amid the standoff between the two countries at the line of actual control. An Indian warship, INS Talwar, undertook refueling with the U.S. Navy tanker USNS Yukon in northern Arabian Sea waters. It was done under the Logistics Exchange Memorandum of Agreement, the defense agreement that allows both countries to work closely and use each other's bases. Today, India's COVID-19 death toll has reached 80,776. The last 3 weeks, India on average has been reporting at least 1,000 new deaths due to COVID-19. However, its fatality rate is nearly half of the global rate at 1.64%, and Maharashtra is the worst hit state in India, followed by Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. COVID-19 death toll in India reaching 80,776 today, with the total number of cases going over 49 lakhs. And the tally across the 49 lakh mark, with the spike of these cases and 1,054 deaths in the last 24 hours are being reported. In a significant victory, India got elected as member of the UN Commission on the Status of Women, the principal global body focused on gender equality and women empowerment, beating China in a hotly contested election. And the annual meeting of the United Nations began in New York yesterday with Kashmir on the agenda as an unresolved dispute. The Foreign Office in Islamabad has rejected the unwarranted references to Pakistan in the statement issued by the US-India Counter-Terrorism Joint Working Group and Designations Dialogue, which underlined the urgent need for Islamabad to take steps to ensure that its territory is not used for terrorist attacks. By participating in the intra-Afghan inaugural dialogue in Doha, India has shown its willingness to engage with all Afghan parties, including the Taliban, for peace in Kabul and to ensure no anti-India activity is allowed from Afghan soil. With the United States seeking continued support for peace in Afghanistan, Chief of Army Staff in Pakistan, General Qamar Bajwa, today credited Prime Minister Imran Khan for Pakistan's role in the start of intra-Afghan talks. And a Pakistan Air Force aircraft has crashed near Attak this morning. After emergence of 16 COVID-19 cases among students and employees of the Rifa Medical College, the district administration of Islamabad has decided to seal the college and a hostel to avoid further spread of the virus.